So for years, I've been listening to right-wingers, especially black Republicans and their AstroTurf groups, claim that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican. This video is my definitive response to that claim. I was inspired to do it because of a recent video by black Republican Alfonso Rachel, which you can watch by clicking the link below. So let's get to it. Was Dr. King a Republican? No way. To explain, let's look at some of the issues that Dr. King supported indisputably. And as we do, I want you to ask yourself how those views square with the views of the Republican Party. 1. Dr. King wanted to help poor people. At the time of his death, he was working on an initiative called the Poor People's Campaign. One of its stated goals was to get Congress to pass a sort of economic Bill of Rights. And he was against war in general and the Vietnam War in particular. This opposition gained him almost as many political enemies as his positions on equality. He was also in favor of large-scale government programs to help the disadvantaged. He was in favor of something that looked an awful lot like affirmative action, saying, quote, "A society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something special for him in order to equip him to compete on a just and equal basis," end quote. He was in favor of labor unions and was assassinated while preparing to speak in Memphis, Tennessee in support of the sanitation workers' strike. In 1961, he said, quote, "In our glorious fight for civil rights, we must guard against being fooled by false slogans such as, quote, 'right to work,' end quote. It is a law to rob us of our civil rights and job rights. Its purpose is to destroy labor unions and the freedom of collective bargaining by which unions have improved wages and working conditions of everyone," end quote. He was in favor of national voter registration standards so that all Americans would have the same protections of their right to vote, and on and on and on. Now ask yourself this question. Do Republicans really support a single issue that I mentioned? Are they not the anti-poor, anti-affirmative action, anti-voting rights, anti-peace, and man, oh man, are they ever the anti-labor union party? Okay. You might be thinking to yourself that with so many right-wingers saying that he was a Republican, Dr. King must have claimed to be one, but maybe he was really just a rhino, a Republican in name only. Did Dr. Martin Luther King identify himself as a member of the Republican Party? No, never. No one can provide a quote from the dozens of speeches, sermons, interviews, and written works of Dr. King where he calls himself a Republican. This is backed up by a spokesperson for the King Center in Atlanta, the official repository of some 200,000 documents by and about Dr. King and his legacy. The spokesperson told the National Journal, quote, "There is absolutely no confirmation that he was a Republican," end quote. Well, does anyone close to him identify him as a member of the Republican Party? No. His wife, Coretta Scott King, has suggested that Dr. King didn't want to be associated with either party, and that makes sense. He was interested in solving problems, not partisanship. In 2008, his son, Martin Luther King III, said, "It is disingenuous to imply that my father was a Republican. He never endorsed any presidential candidate, and there is certainly no evidence that he ever even voted for a Republican. It is even more outrageous to suggest that he would support the Republican Party of today, which has spent so much time and effort trying to suppress African American votes in Florida and many other states," end quote. Disingenuous is a term nice people use when they don't want to call you a damn liar. And no, none of his other children have suggested he was a Republican either. But what about fellow civil rights leaders and clergy? Reverend Joseph Lowry, one of King's co-founders of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, told the Associated Press that there is no reason for anyone to believe King was a Republican. Quote, "It's purely propaganda and poppycock. Even if he was, he would surely have nothing to do with what the Republican Party stands for today," end quote. I could also bore you with quotes from a dozen historians, many of whom wrote books about Dr. King, and none of whom think there is any reason to believe Dr. King was a Republican. But I won't bother. A simple Google search of "was Dr. King a Republican" will yield lots of results. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight one member of the King family that does believe Dr. King was a Republican, Dr. King's niece Alveda. She claims that as a blood relation, she and Dr. King are, quote, "made out of the same stuff," end quote. That is why she knows what his own wife, Coretta Scott King, did not, because, quote, "I got his DNA. She doesn't," end quote. It is unclear why her blood connection is stronger than that of King's own children, but Okay. So there you go. But if Dr. King did not identify with the Republican Party in his life, and surely would take issue with many of the views of today's Republican Party, why are the Republicans so desperate to claim him? You would think that not only would he not want them, but they wouldn't want him either. Well, I think the answer can be found in the legacy left by Dr. King. He was the undisputed leader of the American Civil Rights Movement. In 1964, he was the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. The I Have a Dream speech is considered to be one of the finest speeches in American history. In 1999, the Gallup organization did a poll that ranked Dr. King as the second most widely admired American of the 20th century. Hundreds of streets and hundreds of cities in America are named after him. He is an internationally recognized and revered figure. There is a tremendous value in associating your cause or your party to a man such as this. So, if you're the Democratic Party, you earn that association by being in accord with Dr. King's goals of dignity for the poor, respect for workers' rights, peace, social justice, and the like. If you're the Republican Party, you attempt to co-opt that legacy by claiming tenuous connections to the man through vague family ties and the misstating of his positions. You don't want those ideals, values, and goals anyway. You just want the light they cast. You want the respect they bring. And when your goal is to cover up your own racism, militarism, and the indifference of your party to the disadvantaged, his is a great name to invoke. And because he is not here to defend himself, to speak out against their policies and their lies, they have the opportunity to do to him in death what they could not do to him in life. They can try to co-opt him.